The novel Giant was a bestseller, and it was controversial. The movie is a classic and an Academy Award winner. Julie Gilbert captures it all in her new book, Giant Love, Edna Ferber, her best-selling novel of Texas, and the making of a classic American film. Julie Gilbert is the author of 4 books. She has worked as a professional actress and writer and is currently head of the Writers Academy at the Kravis Center for Performing Arts. Her latest book explores Pulitzer Prize-winning author Edna Ferber, the making of an American classic novel and the film that followed. The title is Giant Love. And I dare say that no one knows Edna Ferber more than you do.
At this point, I think that's true. I do have a cousin who remembers her about 5 years later than I did. We're 5 years apart, and so we can share some early memories, but I hold most of them, yeah.
The book really is a tribute, and you know what it left me with? I wish she had written more. Now, yes, she was your great aunt, but I'm curious about the intimate access and the family history, and yet, in having it in the hands of such a gifted writer, what a blessing for you.
She was a very strong and powerful, well, powerful is better than strong. She was a powerful woman. No nonsense in many ways, but somehow the old and the young came from equidistant points, and we really seemed to click, which was a very lucky break for me growing up.
As I'm reading the book, to me it's 3 stories. Yes, there's the story of the novel Giant. There's the story of the making of the film with Elizabeth Taylor, Rock Hudson, and James Dean. And there's this story of this extraordinary woman herself, Edna Ferber. And I think that's where we should start. Do you want to tell us about her growing up, her background?
Well, her father was an immigrant. He was Hungarian, and he came to the United States and met her mother, Julia Newman. And they settled in the Midwest. They were in Chicago, and they were really quite nomadic in the early days of Ferber's girlhood with her sister Fanny, her older and prettier sister Fanny, and they traveled through the Midwest with a dry goods store called My Store. And they were not prosperous, but they weren't indigent either. And so the childhood was a very close family one, but Ferber was exposed to Ferber and her sister to anti-Semitism in Ottumwa, Iowa, when they were about 7. I think it made both of them tougher, certainly Ferber. Fanny was very pretty, and Ferber was very smart. She was the smart one. And that gave her a certain veneer of toughness. And so when she was a teenager, she did not go through all of those angsty times. And I think it made her imagination flourish so that she could take herself anywhere out of herself.
She was a remarkable woman, and I will underline remarkable. She had such success with the book and with the film. But this is the 1950s. This is a male-dominated world. So do you consider herself a pioneer, a feminist? You wrote that She was a writer who happened to be female.
She was quite feminine. People didn't think so because they equate power with, or did, with a certain kind of masculinity. But she was always, contrary to earlier reports, she was always dressed in pinks or blues, soft colors. Her hair was just beautifully marceled at that time, beautiful designer shoes. So she was very fashionable, and really it was the iron fist and the velvet glove. She was a complete person, which sort of defies any kind of masculine, feminine, category. She just was. Her early leanings were as an actress. And so she had the deportment of an actress, and played a part to a certain extent. She could be extraordinarily charming, but when faced with adversity, she just stood up for herself more than anybody I've ever known. So that there are myths about her, if anybody knows her at all today. But the myth is that she was kind of snarky, tough, on the masculine side. There have been all kinds of brickbats thrown at her because she was so powerful in the 20th century, the first half. She had bestseller after bestseller, and she was a single woman and childless. She was leading the life that she had designed for herself. So I'm trying to reintroduce what I consider an extremely valuable human being to our human race.
Julie, many older women feel marginalized. As I read this book, I'm thinking, not Edna. To me, she grew more confident the older she got.
She was very sensitive, which a lot of people don't understand in strength. She was prickly sometimes, only because her feelings, I think, were on the surface. Every book was a success. Every book was a bestseller, except she did write two autobiographies. Part one, which was called A Peculiar Treasure, and part two, which was at the end of her life. And those stories hit a jugular with people, with men and women. In fact, she was very, very popular during the war. She kind of represented America to them and home soil, and became a New Yorker and part of the Algonquin Circle. In fact, one of the founding members. And so, celebrity is its own form of royalty, and she held on to that all of her life.
The book Giant was controversial. It was a book about class and money and oil barons, and there were social issues, immigration, racial disparity, gender. But Texans were not fans, were they?
No, no, they were hardly happy with Giant. Everybody else was very happy, her publisher and all of the other states in the Union. But she called it the way she saw it. She was an early reporter when she was a young woman in Milwaukee, and she sort of learned at the wheel to get her story. And people didn't appreciate that in Texas, because she laid it out the way she saw it. She did immense research, and found reports of that were hardly flattering, certainly concerning the Mexican American situation in Texas. at that time, and she had death threats when Giant came out, and then of course George Stevens came along and said, "Well, now let's just make everything all right. We'll do a wonderful movie," which is part two of the book.
Do you feel like Edna Ferber had an enhanced social consciousness because she was tackling all of these issues?
She would call fraud when she saw it, and sometimes that sounded nasty, and often she was right. When she was traveling in Europe during the 40s or early 50s, and she came back to New York City, and she decided that New York City was very dirty, that it was just filthy, that the garbage people weren't doing their jobs, that nobody was doing their job, and it became a kind of a it 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 she said it verbally and in writing, and there was a bit of a backlash again, because she was, this small woman with a trumpet about what she saw as injustice to a city, and it it left her less than popular. But I think, nobody likes to be scolded, and she was not afraid to scold, which has its downside, but at least she called it the way she saw it always.
She had such success with the novel, and then, as you write in the book, now we're going to Hollywood, and there is this superstar cast. Now, writing is a very solitary undertaking. Movie making is anything but. How did she maneuver in the Hollywood world?
Fine. She was quite happy. She felt empowered, because in this situation, usually with her books, Showboat and Cimarron and So Big and countless others, she would just sell the book to Samuel Goldwyn or to a studio and walk away. With this one, George Stevens and Henry Ginsberg and Ferber formed a triumvirate, and they were producing partners in the movie. So she had more clout and really a great deal of participation, a third, a third, and a third, and then Warner Brothers footed the bill. But she there are certain factors that I brought out in the book which set somebody free and on a new path. She had a say, but George Stevens had the final word as director, and so she really had a very vivid time, and she had uh, tried to contribute to the screenplay. So she had a whirlwind of a time with Giant. And she was ageless. She looked pretty and fresh, and she visited the set, and everybody made a big thing of her. And I think it was a high time for her.
You write about this interesting relationship with James Dean. Can you talk a little bit about that?
A little bit. um, yeah, I don't want to give away my aces, but I think that Dean felt abandoned maternally. His mother had died when he was very young. He was very young when he filmed Giant. People don't realize it was the last film of his career, and he was 24 years old when he died, and he 23 when he was cast and shot the film. And Ferber was in her early 70s. It was a kind of a friendship. It's hard to categorize it, but he affected her very deeply, and she was prescient about the fact that he could burn out quickly, and unfortunately, she proved right. That he did. They had a good sense of humor between them, and it was unusual. It was quite unusual, and that's all I'll say at this time.
Let's look at Marfa. Marfa is this small Texas town, and usually films were shot on set. They didn't use a set, they used this little town, which, as you write in the book, made quite an impression on your great aunt.
Marfa was the last place that anybody would think to film except for George Stevens, who thought that it was the best place to bring out the Texas, uh, uh, the real indigenous Texas feel. And what he did was he made all of the Marfans part of the process, and he would show uh, dailies to them, and they would all come around and watch them. And I think it was memorable for everybody involved in that movie. And there are not that many people left in the movie today, but certainly Earl Holliman, I spoke to him, and that was just quite a time. And I think with certainly the death shortly after of James Dean, people reflect on that time as that precious last period with Dean.
Edna Ferber had an incredible circle of friends. I mean, way too many to name. But Katharine Hepburn said that together they were unicorn women. So after writing the book, what do you think she meant by that?
Well, adventurous women. Um, when I first heard the phrase, I was very young, and I thought it meant women, who were singular, who go through life kind of with a single horn pointed out. Um, I think that she was experimental in many ways. Let me say that.
The novel Giant, as we said, explores gender, class, race. She had such a grasp on American life, on America in transition. What do you think of the relevance of that writing today?
I think it's a good read. That never grows old. She knew how to get her story. The characters, they pulse. I mean, they're just wonderful. It's an unhappy novel in many ways, and certainly a feminist novel, which people don't know, but it is. And I think it's worthy of a look if people haven't discovered it. Certainly a whole new generation could discover it in a different way, because it really is quite hard boiled in a lot of ways. She was not a sentimental writer.
Is Giant on reading lists today? And I'm like Hemingway or Fitzgerald. And if not, why?
This is such a question, such a good question. She's gone into a kind of eclipse, and I think maybe there's an element of proselytizing, that because she points out the injustices, she loves her characters and lavishes understanding and love on them, but she does point out the injustices that go on in America, in state by state. and also the difficulty for women during that time, and we hope not again, but in being heard. And I think she's more relevant today and right now than she ever has been, since I was a child and she was a big bestseller.
Having Edna Ferber in your life, I imagine you grew up with a love of reading. Am I correct?
Yes.
And what did you gravitate to as a young girl?
So much. I remember early on reading Pearl Buck. I thought Pearl Buck was just wonderful in The Good Earth. Um, and I read a little ahead of myself, a little bit, not too much, until I was maybe 8 or 9. My mother did say that I couldn't grow up happily if I didn't read Edna Ferber. And I remember she sent me off to camp when I was about 10 with So Big, Showboat, and Cimarron. And some short stories, because she was a wonderful short story writer. I was a good reader and I loved biographies. I remember just adoring biographies, mainly of women. Um, so I guess I was kind of an early feminist reader. I liked reading about women. Um, and then, of course, as I grew up, a I was always a very passionate reader and had to have a book with me. And yeah, but I but reading Ferber was quite an experience, because as a child, you don't like to be made to do things, and my mother said, you have to. And I resisted, I remember, and then just forgetting that she was my relative and that I saw her quite often, just forgetting all of that. She took me right away into uh, into America, the heartland, and that was the best history for me. She really is a terrific history lesson, as you learn state by state so much about this country and how it was developed and what we fought for.
When you were putting this book together, was there something you wish you could have called Aunt Edna and asked her?
Yeah, unicorn women. Yeah, her personal life, her private life. I don't know if I could ever dare have done that, but just talking a little bit about lost chances, perhaps lost loves. Um, there in the book, I ask quite a few questions about this, about her personal life. Um, George Kaufman, George S. Kaufman, the very great playwright and witty playwright, was her partner. And they wrote plays together. They wrote 5 plays together, 6 plays together. The hits were Stage Door, Dinner at 8, and The Royal Family. And he was very tough on her. And at one point, when war broke out in Europe, and then the United States came into the war, the Second World War, and she said to him, "Oh, George, I must do something. I need to do something. What do you think I should do?" And he said, "Well, Edna, you could be a tank." And it's funny, but I think that it's a little hurtful. And there was a part of her that went right directly into the romantic life of a book, but a part that was maybe unfulfilled. And I would like to just ask her a little bit, but you had to be careful in the way you phrased it. So, yeah, I'm just curious. And there was a young man years and years ago when she was very young, and it burned out. I don't know what or how, but I did find when I was sorting through things to send to her archive in Wisconsin, and I found some letters from him that were very interesting.
When I read this book, I came away with the feeling that she, Edna Ferber, was larger than life, that she was the giant. The book is Giant Love, Edna Ferber, her best-selling novel of Texas, and the making of a classic American film. Julie Gilbert, I want to thank you so much.
Thank you. It was my total pleasure.
I'm Ann Bocock. Please join me on the next Between the Covers.